What would you do if your own child tried to take everything you spent your whole life building? I was seconds away from losing it all. My home, my savings, my dignity, until I revealed a secret that made the judge go pale and made my son wish he'd never dragged me into that courtroom. The courtroom in Richmond, Virginia, smelled like dusty books and stale coffee. The kind of scent that clings to places where too many lives have been argued away. The wooden benches were stiff and cold, pressing into my back as if they wanted me to break before Judge Williams even spoke. I clutched my purse like it was the only solid thing left in my world. Across the aisle stood my son, Dustin, my own flesh and blood, avoiding my eyes like I was some stranger who cut him off at a stoplight. He stood beside his lawyer, Mr. Jameson, a slick man dressed in a charcoal suit so shiny I could see the overhead lights reflecting off it. He wore that smug little grin men get when they believe money and confidence will win them any battle. I half expected him to pull out a cigar and laugh like a cartoon villain. My late husband's will sat at the center of this whole storm. Somehow I had become the villain in Dustin's imagination. It's surreal, isn't it? You raise a child, kiss scraped knees, stay up through fevers, give up everything you worked for, and suddenly he's painting you as unfit, irresponsible, unworthy of your own life's work. I kept searching Dustin's face for even a spark of the little boy who once hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. The same child who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, pressing his small body against mine until the scary sounds went away. But all I saw was resentment. Cold, sharp, hungry. The same look I'd seen creeping into his eyes over the past months, ever since George passed and the will reading revealed everything had been left to me. The judge called the room to order, and Mr. Jameson leapt to his feet. He spoke with theatrical confidence, describing me as unable to manage her finances, reckless, wasteful. If he only knew how many nights I stretched $20 into a whole week's groceries back when George was building his consulting firm from nothing. If he only knew about the marketing campaigns I crafted at our kitchen table while Dustin napped in his high chair. Then Dustin stood. His voice shook not with emotion, but with that artificial outrage people rehearse in front of mirrors. "This woman never worked a day in her life," he declared, his words slicing through me like broken glass. "She just spent my father's money for 25 years. This old woman just wastes what she never earned. She has no right to everything he built." This from the same boy who once cried because I wouldn't let him eat cookies before dinner. The same child who begged me to read just one more bedtime story, who made Mother's Day cards with crooked letters, spelling out "best mom ever." And here he was, trying to take everything his father and I built together, every penny, every memory. But he had no idea that I was holding a card he didn't know existed, and when I played it, everything would change. It felt like I had stepped into an upside-down world where reason didn't matter and truth had been replaced by theatrics. Have you ever sat in a room and wondered if you were the only sane person left? That was me in that courtroom, watching strangers nod along as if my son's accusations were gospel. Part of me wanted to stand up and shout, "Are you all hearing this? Do you really believe I'm the villain here?" But I didn't. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, because I knew that in a place like this, losing your temper meant losing the war. As the hours dragged on, my mind drifted back to better times. I thought of 1998, when I was Beverly Fletcher, marketing executive at Pinnacle Communications, pulling down a solid $50,000 a year and climbing the corporate ladder. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. I had ideas, ambition, a small office with a window that actually opened. I was somebody before I became just George's wife and Dustin's mom. I remembered the night George and I sat at our kitchen table, calculator between us, weighing the impossible choice. His consulting business was growing, but he needed support, someone to handle the marketing, manage client relationships, develop strategies. We couldn't afford to hire anyone yet, and childcare for 7-year-old Dustin was eating up most of my paycheck anyway. What if you took a leave of absence? He'd suggested, his hand covering mine. Just temporarily, until we get on our feet. You're so much better at the marketing side than I am. You could work from home, help build something that's ours. 25 years. That's how long, temporarily, lasted. I gave up my $50,000 salary, my 401k contributions, my professional identity. I became the invisible partner, the woman behind the man, crafting marketing campaigns from my kitchen table while Dustin did homework at the same surface where I'd spread client proposals. Every pitch George presented, I wrote it. Every major business decision, we discussed it over dinner after Dustin went to bed, sometimes talking until midnight about market positioning and client psychology. But somehow in Dustin's mind, none of that counted as real work. I looked at my son again, hoping for even a flicker of recognition. The little boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long car rides, who came running to me with every scraped knee and broken toy. Instead, his expression was carved from stone, cold, determined, unfamiliar. It hurt in a way I can't quite explain, a slow twisting deep inside the chest that felt like grief for someone who was still alive. The lawyer's voice eventually faded into background noise as I focused on my breathing, in and out. Beverly, you've survived worse, I told myself. I pictured George's steady hand, resting over mine, the calm he carried with him everywhere, the way he used to remind me that we were partners in everything. Then Judge Williams's voice sliced through the silence. Mrs. Caldwell, do you have anything you'd like to say? I straightened, my pulse thudding in my ears. Whatever happened next, I owed the truth to myself and to George. But before I could speak, something important needed to be told, because my story didn't start in that courtroom. It started long before, with a man who planned for everything and a woman who sacrificed more than anyone knew. George was the kind of man who made lists for his lists. He had backup plans for his backup plans, and even the junk drawer looked like it had been arranged by a museum curator. When he got sick, he sat me down at our old kitchen table, the same one we'd gathered around for decades, and told me he wanted to make sure I'd be safe long after he was gone. You built this business as much as I did, he said, his voice already weakened by the cancer that would take him 6 months later. More, actually. You were the brains behind every success we had. His fingers traced the worn wood grain where we'd spent countless nights, strategizing, planning, dreaming together. I can still feel his warm hand covering mine as he walked me through every detail of his will. He left everything to me, and tucked inside the folder was a simple handwritten note. Because you made every sacrifice worth it, and because none of this would exist without you. I cried the day I read it, and I still keep that note in my nightstand, worn soft at the edges from the number of times I've opened it just to feel close to him again. But Dustin looked at our home and saw dollar signs. Maybe I should have seen it coming. Even as a kid, he always wanted the nicest things, the newest gadgets, the pricey sneakers that made me stretch our budget farther than it should have gone. When other mothers bought generic cereal, I found myself reaching for the name brand because Dustin would complain about being embarrassed at sleepovers. I tried to teach him gratitude, to show him the value of earning something instead of expecting it. But mothers carry guilt like extra weight on our shoulders. Did I say yes too often? Did I say no at the wrong times? Late at night, when the house was quiet except for the ticking hallway clock, I replayed everything I could have done differently. After George died, the house felt unbearably empty. I walked from room to room, touching the memories we'd built together. The armchair where he read industry reports, the kitchen table where we strategized late into the night, the home office where I'd spent countless hours crafting the marketing materials that built his reputation. Every corner reminded me of the partnership we'd created, the way we'd complemented each other's strengths. So when Dustin began dropping hints about the will, it caught me off guard. First, it sounded like concern. Mom, that house is too big for you. You're rattling around in there all alone. Then it shifted. Maybe you should think about selling. What are your retirement savings like? Did Dad leave you enough to live on? His tone sharpened, his questions too pointed. When I tried to explain George's wishes gently, hoping he'd understand, he wouldn't listen. He couldn't see past the dollar signs to understand what George and I had actually built together. "You never even had a job, Mom," he'd said during one particularly heated argument. "Dad worked his ass off while you played house. You don't deserve everything he earned." That phrase echoed in my mind now as I sat in the courthouse. Played house. As if the 15-hour days I'd spent managing client communications were a hobby. As if the marketing strategies I'd developed that tripled George's revenue were just idle entertainment. As if raising his son while simultaneously building his business was some kind of leisurely pastime. That was when I realized the storm was coming. Dustin saw George's will as nothing more than a locked door standing between him and the life he believed he deserved. He wasn't grieving his father. He was calculating his inheritance. This fight wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about love, about reclaiming the voice I'd quieted for years in the name of supporting my family. Sitting in that courtroom, surrounded by wood-paneled walls and the scent of old paper, I felt the weight of 25 years pressing down on me. I thought of the sacrifices George and I made, the dreams we shared, the quiet strength it took to build something lasting. I thought of the confidence George had in me when he signed that will. He believed in my judgment. He trusted me. And I knew then that I couldn't let my son or anyone else erase that. We women spend so much of our lives shrinking ourselves so others can feel big. We apologize for taking up space, for having opinions, for wanting credit for our contributions. We smile and nod when people dismiss our work as helping out or supporting, as if we were junior partners in our own lives. But there comes a moment when enough is enough. As I sat there, I felt something inside me click into place. I wasn't apologizing anymore, not for loving my family, not for building a life, not for outliving my husband and honoring his wishes, not for the decades I'd spent crafting the success that Dustin now wanted to claim his father had achieved alone. This was my line in the sand. Back in the courtroom, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. If someone had dimmed the lights and added a thunderclap, it would have looked like a scene straight out of a courtroom drama on TV. Judge Williams glanced up from her papers, eyes sharp behind her glasses. Mr. Jameson lounged back with that smug grin he wore like cologne, and Dustin sat rigid, convinced I was about to crumble under the weight of his accusations. But I didn't. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and took a breath that felt like it carried every year of my life. Then I looked the judge dead in the eye and said 4 words that changed everything. "Check the email, Your Honor." For a moment, the room froze. You could hear the old wall clock ticking like it was counting down to something big. Judge Williams's eyebrows shot up so fast, I thought they might vanish into her hairline. Mr. Jameson's smirk slipped, not a lot, but enough to give me a tiny spark of satisfaction. And Dustin? His face lost color faster than a cheap flag left out in the rain. He stared at me like I had just uncovered a secret he never knew existed, which, in fact, was exactly what I had done. The truth was simple. George had always been a step ahead of everyone, especially our son. That man prepared for everything, every business decision, every financial move, every major client relationship. So when he built his business, he left nothing to chance. Hidden in our shared email account, spanning 15 years, were hundreds of exchanges between George and me. Late-night strategy sessions, client analyses, marketing campaigns, financial projections. Every major decision that built Caldwell Consulting bore my fingerprints. George had documented everything, not because he planned to use it as evidence someday, but because he valued my input so much he wanted to preserve our conversations. "Send the Henderson proposal to the client tomorrow," read one email from George to me in 2008. "Your revisions made it perfect. You always know exactly what they need to hear." Another from 2012. "The Johnson account wants to renew for 3 years instead of 1. Beverly's relationship-building strategy worked like magic again." And my personal favorite, from 2015. "Couldn't have done any of this without my silent co-founder. You're the brains behind every success we've had, B." I didn't find these emails until months after the funeral. I'd been cleaning out our shared digital files during a rainy afternoon when I stumbled across folder after folder of our business correspondence. Reading them felt like finding love letters, except these letters proved something Dustin desperately needed to understand. Each email was a piece of evidence that I wasn't just George's wife who played house. I was his business partner, his strategic advisor, his marketing genius, the woman who turned his technical expertise into compelling client proposals, the person who built the relationships that sustained his business for decades. Back in the courtroom, Judge Williams motioned for the bailiff to bring her a laptop. My hands trembled slightly as I logged into our email account, but deep inside I felt a calm I hadn't felt in months. I'd done everything I could. The rest was up to the truth. The judge scrolled through email after email, her expression growing more serious with each exchange. The room was silent except for the soft clicking of keys and the occasional rustle of papers. Mr. Jameson's confident posture began to deflate like a punctured balloon. Dustin sat frozen, watching his narrative crumble in real time. "Mrs. Caldwell," Judge Williams said, looking up from the screen, "would you mind explaining this email thread from 2010 about the Morrison account? Your husband writes here that your market analysis saved us from a disastrous partnership. What did that involve?" I straightened, finding my voice. Morrison Industries wanted us to handle their product launch, but something felt wrong about their financial projections. I spent 3 weeks researching their market position, their competitors, their leadership team. I discovered they were about to face a major lawsuit that would tank their stock price. And what happened? We declined the contract. 2 months later, Morrison Industries filed for bankruptcy. If we'd taken that account, it would have destroyed our reputation and cost us 3 other major clients. Judge Williams nodded, scrolling through more emails. "And this thread from 2013 about the Riverside Development Project? That was my idea entirely," I said, glancing at Dustin's shocked face. I noticed that our biggest client, Riverside Construction, was struggling with community opposition to their new housing development. I suggested George offer a community relations consulting package. It became 30% of our revenue for 2 years. The judge continued reading, occasionally asking questions that revealed the depth of my involvement in every aspect of the business. Each answer felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been erased from the story Dustin told. "Your Honor," Mr. Jameson interjected, his earlier confidence completely gone. "While these emails certainly show Mrs. Caldwell was involved in the business, they don't necessarily prove—" "Mr. Jameson," Judge Williams interrupted, "I'm looking at 15 years of documented business partnership. Mrs. Caldwell didn't just help out with her husband's business. Based on this correspondence, she was integral to its success." She turned back to me. "Mrs. Caldwell, did you receive any formal compensation for this work?" "No, Your Honor. We considered it a joint venture. The business was in George's name for simplicity, but we always treated it as ours together. Every major decision was made at our kitchen table, usually after Dustin went to bed. And when you gave up your marketing position at Pinnacle Communications in 1998, what was the understanding about your role in your husband's business?" George needed someone he could trust completely, someone who understood marketing and could help him grow the client base. We couldn't afford to hire anyone, and I was already helping him with proposals and client presentations in my spare time. It seemed like a natural evolution. Judge Williams nodded, reading more. "This email from your husband in 2017 is particularly telling. He writes, 'Beverly, your crisis management during the Hartwell situation was brilliant. I wouldn't have known how to handle their public relations disaster without you. You saved our biggest contract.'" I remembered that crisis vividly. Hartwell Manufacturing had a workplace accident that made local news. Their CEO panicked and wanted to fire George to avoid association with the incident. I'd spent 2 weeks crafting a response strategy that positioned George as their solution, not their liability. It worked. "Your Honor," I said, feeling stronger with each revelation. I didn't just support George's business, I helped build it. Every client proposal, every marketing strategy, every crisis management plan, we developed them together. The only difference was that his name was on the contracts. Dustin finally found his voice, though it came out smaller than before. But she didn't have the education, the credentials. "Son," Judge Williams said, her tone sharp, "your mother had a marketing degree and 5 years of professional experience when she left her job to support your father's business. According to these emails, she brought expertise he didn't have." The weight of 15 years of evidence hung in the air like a verdict no one could overturn. You can argue with a lawyer, but you can't argue with documented proof of partnerships spanning decades. Judge Williams cleared her throat, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen too many family disputes to tolerate nonsense. The court finds that Mr. George Caldwell's will reflects not only his legal right to dispose of his property as he saw fit, but also a recognition of his wife's substantial contribution to the family's financial success. She paused, looking directly at Dustin. Furthermore, this court notes that Mrs. Caldwell's sacrifice of her own career to build a joint enterprise demonstrates exactly the kind of partnership that marriage is intended to protect. This case is dismissed. The words hit the courtroom like a gavel strike to the heart. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Relief washed over me, mixed with grief for the man I lost and the son I no longer recognized. But beneath all of that was something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Pride in George for documenting our partnership. Pride in myself for standing firm. Pride in the life we built, even if parts of it had cracked along the way. As the courtroom emptied, I met Dustin's eyes. For a split second, I saw a flicker of the boy he once was. The one who hugged my legs when thunder scared him, who made me paper flowers for Mother's Day, who once told his kindergarten class that his mommy was the smartest person in the whole world. But it vanished, replaced by embarrassment and anger. Dustin stormed out, not bothering to look back. Mr. Jameson, who started the morning smirking like he was preparing for a victory speech, looked deflated, shoulders sagging as he trailed behind with his briefcase full of useless arguments. Watching my son walk away was a different kind of ache. Memories flooded in, birthday cakes I'd stayed up late decorating, school projects we'd worked on together, scraped knees I'd kissed better, and quiet talks about his dreams for the future. I wondered if we'd ever find our way back to each other, or if this courtroom battle had drawn a permanent line between us. Still, as I gathered my purse and stepped out of the courthouse, something else took root inside me. Strength. The real kind. The kind you don't notice until you're forced to dig deep. I had stood up for myself, for George's wishes, for the life we'd built together. I had refused to let guilt, fear, or the heartbreak of a fractured family silence me. The late afternoon sun felt warm on my face as I walked to my car. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, wasn't bracing for the next attack on my character or my worth. I was simply Beverly Caldwell, a woman who had spent 25 years building something meaningful and had fought to keep it. My phone started ringing before I even reached the parking lot. Word travels fast in a small town, especially when it involves courthouse drama. "Beverly, honey, I heard what happened," came the voice of my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. "I just want you to know that some of us never doubted you for a second. That boy of yours has some nerve, but you showed him, didn't you?" More calls followed. My sister-in-law, apologizing for not speaking up sooner, but admitting she'd always known I was the real force behind George's success. My old college roommate, who'd driven down from D.C. just to be there for moral support. Even the mailman, who somehow knew just enough about the court case to give me a wink and a thumbs up when he delivered my mail the next day. It reminded me that no matter how tough life gets, we're never truly alone. There's always someone in your corner, even if it's just the lady down the street who makes the world's best banana bread and isn't afraid to tell your ungrateful son exactly what she thinks of his behavior. But something else happened too, something that surprised me. Women started reaching out, sharing their own stories of invisible labor, of sacrifices unrecognized, of contributions diminished. A young mother from my church told me about giving up her nursing career to support her husband's medical practice, only to have his family treat her like hired help. Another woman, recently divorced, thanked me for showing that a woman's work has value even when it doesn't come with a paycheck. "You made me realize I need to document everything," she said. "My ex-husband is trying to claim I never contributed to his business, but I have the emails to prove otherwise. Thank you for fighting." These conversations opened my eyes to something I'd never fully grasped. My story wasn't just about one family's conflict over inheritance. It was about every woman who'd ever been told her work didn't count because it happened, behind the scenes. Every mother who'd sacrificed her career for her family's success. Every wife who'd been treated like a dependent rather than a partner. When I got home that evening, the house felt different, lighter somehow. The shadows that had clung to the corners since George passed seemed to recede. I kicked off my shoes, poured a generous glass of wine, and turned on my favorite oldies playlist. Then, right there in the middle of my kitchen, I danced. I twirled across the linoleum, laughing at myself, letting the years melt away. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not just from the legal battle, but from the weight of being invisible, unrecognized, taken for granted. Of course, the next morning, my knees reminded me I wasn't 25 anymore. I winced, stretched, and laughed. It was worth it. Sometimes you have to remind yourself and the world that you're still here, still capable of joy, still able to create a little magic in an ordinary day. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything. I thought about George, how he always believed in me even when I doubted myself. I thought about Dustin, the choices he made, and whether we might someday find our way back to each other. And I thought about forgiveness, the kind you offer others, and the harder kind you offer yourself. Standing up for myself hadn't been about money or property. It had been about reclaiming my worth, my voice, my story. It had been about refusing to be erased from the narrative of my own life. As I write this now, sitting at the same kitchen table where George and I once planned our future, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when it truly mattered? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between what was easy and what was right? Maybe you've lived through a family story as complicated as mine, or maybe you've felt invisible in your own life, unrecognized for contributions only you can see. Your story matters. Your work has value. Your sacrifices count. So pour a glass of wine, turn up your favorite song, and remember, you're stronger than you think. And sometimes, just sometimes, fighting for what's right means revealing truths that others would prefer stayed hidden. But the fight is always worth it.